and welcome to Philosophy Fools, a bi-weekly podcast where a young father and old bachelor talk about life, philosophy, and staying curious. After we catch up on what's triggered our curiosity since our last podcast, Josh and Uncle Greg discuss some select topics from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and how it's good for a lot more than war. Finally, we'll wrap up with Josh's Dad Corner and Uncle Greg's Thought of the Week. Hope that sounds good, because that's what we're doing. Oh, and a quick program note. This episode marks the end of what we're calling our Season 1. Josh and I are going to get our heads together to tweak the format a little to keep it fun for us, and we hope for you too. If you have any ideas for different directions you'd like us to explore, please drop us a note at PhilosophyFoolsPodcast@gmail.com. Okay, let's get started.
Good morning, Uncle Greg. How's it going?
Good morning, Josh. I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing awesome. It's a rainy Sunday morning, so I'm just trying to wake up here in West Virginia. And
well, I'm here to tell you that it's pretty much exactly the same thing here in Arlington. It is a very just yucky morning. And so what better to do than hang out with some cool family friends and chat about crazy philosophy?
Sounds good to me. What do we have going on today?
Well, we are going to be talking about The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And as usual, we're going to run through some curiosity triggers or things that prompted our curiosity during the week. And we're going to wind up with your Dad Corner and my Thought of the Week, which is a really good one this week. And but I guess we'll just kick off with our curiosity triggers. So is there anything that's happened in the last couple of weeks that has sparked your curiosity or made you interested?
Well, on our last episode, we talked about how how not allowing your environment to kind of persuade your actions. We just brought up that thought. You know, it's not like it has to happen or doesn't have to happen. But so it is October. And so October brings, like I was talking about last time, eating candy or Halloween candy. And then we got into, why does Halloween candy even exist? Well, but this month, one big thing I do is I watch a lot of Halloween and horror movies. And so the family and I, every single night since October 1st, have watched either a show or a horror movie. So that was my curiosity trigger, is that my little kids watching horror movies and then kind of like getting scared and reacting to that. And it's been pretty fun. Have you been watching any Halloween or horror movies?
I have not to date. And a lot of it has to do with, I for some reason, I'm too far away from Halloween. I need to be within a week of Halloween before I start getting into my Halloween movies. But I'm also, the sort of like more modern, gory horror movie sort of passed me by. I went to go see Friday the 13th on opening night in the theater. And while I was watching it, I was like, well, this is just stupid. It was just, everything about it was something that was bothering me in terms of how the kills were filmed. And it was just, the whole thing was something where I was just like, this is just gross. And I'm not scared because I can see what they did by like strapping Kevin Bacon's head to the pillow, but he's at an angle so the arrow can come through his neck. And I was like, just whatever. But that's because I'm a film buff. And so I it's something about the idea of just cruelty as horror versus, I don't know, atmosphere as horror. So and let's face it, Josh, I'm an old person. Old people can't be too scared because we just drop dead.
You know, I was going to ask you that. Like, do you allow yourself to get scared, like watching these movies or anything like that anymore? Or are you too much of a movie buff, you would say, and like you see past that or whatever?
What it really comes down to is it has to be a master director, and so the master director is able to cut through that, right? So it's when I saw Alien in the theater for the first time, it scared the hell out of me because I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. And I knew all the tricks they were doing, but it didn't matter because they were just doing a really good job of making me scared. But it sets a super high bar because I guess the other thing is you could just kind of be in the mood for something, because I remember there's an old film, it's a Disney movie, and it's called Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was based on a Ray Bradbury story. which when I saw it, I was an adult when I saw it. And I was like, my God, this is really, really a good spooky movie. That's different than saying like, I'm terrified. It's just something that sort of brings up spooky feelings inside of you. And so I need to go back and revisit that film just to see whether or not it really was a good movie or if it just hit me a certain way at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. Like what I've noticed is that I feel like I've kind of I enjoy getting scared by movies, and I have to like kind of turn that on or turn that off. And so now when I'm watching movies, like if I'm with my kids, it's like it's automatically turned on, or like I'm not getting scared when I'm watching it with my kids. But then when I'm with my wife, then it flips the other direction, and it's like I want to get scared and I allow myself to get scared. So it's like some kind of like dad thing that's coming out, I think, when I'm watching the horror movies, that like turns on that I don't think about. And so that's kind of what I was getting curious about, is just like how just my biology or whatever kind of triggered that, like, so that like when you are with your family and with your kids, like you're automatically like on this different level, like where you're just kind of like in protection mode or whatever. Like
I think that might be it. I mean, this is just an intuition, but it just really seems like, in any moment of the day, you're always trying to, make sure that you model behavior for your family that you want them to have. And one of the things you absolutely wouldn't want your children to have is like to be like terrified all the time. So, and so you would be like, hey, you know what? Let's play this cool, because, they're impressionable at this point. And it makes sense not to just give in to like, oh my God, this is the scariest thing ever. We're all going to die.
Yeah. So that was like my curiosity trigger of the week. And, I love horror movies. And so I'm excited this month to watch some more.
Now, are there go-tos for you? Do you have ones that you keep in the pipeline that you always go back to?
I mean, I'm a pretty big fan of the classics, but I did watch Malignant. I just watched, and then I'm watching Nightmare on Elm Street, the 2010 version. But then I like going back and watching all the Halloweens. Well, pretty much like just the first Halloween, and then there was a Halloween that came out. I think it was in 2012. And I really like that version of the Halloween too. And then my main classics are Evil Dead. Like I pretty much watch those every single October. Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2, and then Army of Darkness.
Have you ever seen The Return of the Living Dead?
Return of the Living Dead? Yeah. And that's the zombie movie. I mean,
it's a comedy zombie movie.
Okay. I'm not sure. I probably.
Okay, it's legit hilarious and simultaneously gross. So it's worth a look if you haven't seen it. But for me, I for whatever reason go back to the old classics. But a lot of that has to do with the fact that when I was growing up, there was no cable, there was no nothing. So you really only had 3 channels, and on those, well, that's a lie, 6 channels. So there's 6 channels, and on those 6 channels, only 2 of them showed movies. And then of those, they always had the same package of movies that they could buy and show. So I got into all the old Universal horror movies. So things like Frankenstein and King Kong and Dracula and all that stuff. And so for whatever reason, that really imprinted itself on me as being the like horror movies. And what they really are is kind of like spooky movies or atmospheric movies, because at no point do I see Boris Karloff walking around as Frankenstein and think to myself, that's a reanimated corpse. That's just not what's going through my head. I'm just like, man, what's really cool makeup that he's using. That's I think that's the difference between a big generational shift between you and I, is that when you were growing up, there was already just a ton of content to have to sort of dig through on any given topic. So if you wanted to watch a romance or you wanted to watch a comedy, you had a million to get through.
Yeah, it's almost too many. I mean, it's rough sometimes. So I like your recommendations. And doesn't HBO Max have a bunch of those old movies on it?
Oh, they do. And I was looking at that last night. So, but I'll definitely, there's another recommendation I have for you that has nothing to do with horror, but that I definitely wanted you to check out. And it's called My Dinner with Andre.
Okay.
And it is quite literally, And it's a movie that you, if you saw it, would be like, I will never watch this movie. Like, I guarantee you that in your brain, if you saw the thing, you would be like, no, I'm not going to see this, because it's just two guys talking. But when it comes down to brass tacks, it's like the original podcast. It's a film from, I think it was 1980 or maybe even a little bit earlier, but it's two guys talking for 2 hours. And the context is they're both artistic people. They're like theater people, and they're talking about life, and they're talking about the meaning of life, and that they have a sort of fundamental disagreement between them of what it means to live a good life. And it's fascinating. It really is. And it's something that I didn't catch up to until maybe like 2 months ago. And I was like, Josh really needs to see this. But you just have to get past any mental picture you have in your head. You just have to say, look, I listen to podcasts all the time. Let me watch this film like it's a podcast, because it really is an amazing representation of what it's like to discuss very big ideas, but from a creative and artistic perspective. And you can see how everybody could benefit from just discussing things in that way. So My Dinner with Andre on HBO Max.
Sounds good. I'll check it out, and you should put it in the show notes and have our audience watch it too, and maybe they'll discuss it with you.
I will do it. Okay. And I'll tell you, my curiosity triggers this week, I was reminded of the fact that every morning when I go to the gym, or lately, I've just been going on like a 5-mile walk instead, I make myself take at least one photograph in a way that I find it to be an interesting or evocative image. The point that I'm trying to drive home to myself is it's very easy to just walk past all the kind of visual stimulation that exists out in the world. And it just becomes nothing as you're sort of passing by. You're trying to get from point A to point B, and you take nothing of the world inside of yourself. And so for me, it's a discipline to take one specific photograph every morning to document a very small moment of my journey that day, strictly for the purpose of reminding myself to do that, to never take for granted that everything's just boring or everything's dull.
I mean, that has to help with your mindfulness and just living in the moment, right? Because you're essentially searching for this picture on your whole entire commute. And then, so you're really living in every little moment, because you're like, oh, that's really nice. And that's really nice, until you find your picture, right?
Exactly. And the thing that sort of generated this was back in the day when I had to commute by a vehicle to wherever I was going. I realized that it was time that I felt was lost time, that it didn't matter. Like, I could listen to a book, I could listen to a podcast, I could listen to a lot of things, but the experience of commuting was not a robust thing, because it's life-threatening, that there's a certain part of you that has to be conscious, really aware of where your foot is and where the bumper of your car is in relationship to the car in front of you, particularly in the kind of gridlock traffic we've got here in DC. Mm-hmm. And when I all of a sudden didn't have to be in a car, because I tried to make it interesting. Like I said, podcast, I was like, well, maybe that'll do it. And I just realized that everything was a zone out. It wasn't a tune in. And when I had the opportunity to be able to commute by foot, then that's when I realized that, every step along the way here is something that could either be ignored or it could be interesting. And that there's a balance that you have to strike, because you'll never get anywhere if everything is interesting, because all the blades of grass as you walk out the front door could just trap you within 5 feet of your front door, because it's so friggin' interesting. So it's about trying to find that balance of being mindful, but still getting to where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I just wanted to mention mindfulness again. I mean, I actually heard somebody talking about being mindful in the car, which is pretty interesting. I mean, because that's when you're doing meditation, or if you're thinking mindfully, you're kind of just trying to be present or whatever. And when you really focus on driving, and just like every little thing, like what you're doing, how fast you're going, the cars, and really focusing on everything, it's really different than regular driving, which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
because like how much we're actually just kind of going through the motions. Because I mean, I drive an hour and a half each way, so and I've been doing that for almost 2 years now, and I mean, it is a lot of zoning out, kind of like you're saying, and I mean,
it's
hard.
absolutely possible to have gotten through the whole journey, get out in the parking lot, be walking into your office, and realize in that moment that you can't remember anything that just happened. that the drive has become such a reflexive action that it's no bueno. So so absolutely, I think that a little gag like I've got to take one good photograph every morning is just a great way of me to make sure I don't drift back into the pattern of just zoning out. And you can zone out in the car, you can zone out walking, you can zone out anywhere you are. So you're absolutely right that just taking that moment for mindfulness, it can turn the most mundane activity into something that's, I don't want to I want to overstate it, but magical. It's something where it's just things are there that you didn't realize were there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get it. And it could be magical for some people. So,
yeah, exactly. And so the last little chunk before I go was I just started to watch a short documentary called Ballet 422 on HBO. It just popped up last night, but I bring it up as something from a curiosity standpoint, because it's the story of a guy creating the choreography for a new piece for the New York Ballet. And it's something that I have no knowledge of. And so watching somebody go through an entire process, I've never even thought about what does it mean to create the position and the movement of a person, and then stepping back and saying like, oh, I'm not only creating the movement and position of people, I'm creating the movement and position of people together across a space. And then what about the lighting? And what about the music? And what about all of these things? And I was like, oh, this is opening up a whole universe that I have no knowledge about. I'm never going to be the choreographer for a ballet, but it does sort of bring to mind all the things that you need to do to be really good at something.
Sounds pretty interesting. Maybe I'll check it out someday.
Sounds good. Okay, so that's it for our curiosity stuff this week. So let's take a quick break, and we'll be back to discuss your favorite ideas from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, and we're back. All right, Uncle Greg. So today we are talking about The Art of War.
This is an interesting Chinese text, specifically talking just about what it says. It's The Art of War. It is it's a war manual that over the decades and centuries, many people have taken to be a manual for any type of activity that is sort of goal-oriented in the same way that war is. So people will look at it as a good way of looking at sports or looking at business. And I think that in many ways, that is an interesting reading of the text. But at the same time, it's also, I think it forgets the kind of beauty and simplicity of the text, which is how do you win a war? So it's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, one thing I'm kind of excited about is exactly what you were talking about is so I've actually only read or listened to this one time or maybe two times ever. So I don't know too much about it, and I haven't read any of the analysis like from the point of business. So I'm interested in like what you have to say when it does relate to business and everything, because I know you've told me in the past that this book is related, like a lot of people have correlated to business and even like, written different books or whatever that kind of correlates the ideas from it. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this.
Sounds good. Well, and as usual, I was not able to catch up with the text this time. So the burden fell to you to come up with our top 4 topics out of the text. So I just want to check in with you and just say, like, what's your number one idea from The Art of War that you want to talk about?
Well, the same thing with the Tao Te Ching is that there's tons of ideas that I think we could talk about from this book and just, talk for a while about each topic, because in the same way as that this culture is really talks in I mean, definitely talking about war, obviously, in this book, but does talk in different ways than the Western philosophy that we were reading for this.
Mhm.
So my first idea, or the first quote that I have here, is victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win. So with this, pretty much my first thoughts are, and then I'll let you go ahead after this. My first thoughts is that you just have to basically be prepared and know yourself, but before you go to war. And so, and what I first think about this is usually I go into like sports or golf, or just knowing your game. Make sure you practice before. And just really be prepared for going into whatever it is that you're going into. Those were my first thoughts on this. What about you?
I think that's on target. It's just, I think, a little bit more deep than that from the perspective of, again, important to remember, he's talking about going to war, i.e. getting killed. And I think that when he talks about like victorious warriors versus defeated warriors, he's really thinking about the true reality of defeat versus like, we get beaten basketball or in football, we're like, man, we're sad. And it's just it's a different level of what defeat means. And one of the things that I think is he's driving at here is this concept of victorious warriors win first is a deep notion of saying, like, the place that I'm going to win this battle isn't in the battle. That's a part of it, but that where I'm really going to win this battle is by truly understanding like my goals. And that's where I think that the highest level, it's planning. This notion of, a battle's coming. It usually doesn't pop up on you. So you got to really sit back and go like, well, the battle's coming. What can I do to win this battle? And so it's all the work that you would do at that point. And it's truly the idea that if you put this effort in, and I step back and want to be clear that a lot of times people talk about planning like it's just like I took a couple of minutes to think about what I'm going to do. And that's not planning. Planning is identifying what the goal is, assessing all your resources to get to that goal, understanding what it will mean if you are victorious or not victorious, thinking about all of the potential ways to affect the outcome. Because once if you take the idea of like, I'm just going to go to war and I'm going to be the strongest and meanest guy out there and I'm going to win, is something that it has some potential for success, and but the variables are pretty strong, and it's not unlikely that you're going to get beat because you didn't put in that kind of preparation. But it's the formality of the preparation that I think he's really driving at, because in order for him to make this statement that a victorious warrior wins first, you really want to think hard about what does it mean to win first before I go to battle. Because so many people place all their emphasis on the battle itself. And so that, I think, you can take that broadly out to the world. And you could even take it to something as seemingly unrelated as like parenting. If you can sit back and say to yourself, like, well, what does it mean to prepare my child for, like, let's say the kind of conflict that might arise on a playground, and, where they're like, because God knows, I know I got into this weird fights because people like to fight big people. And I was just like, I was unprepared because my parents never sat around and said like, well, conflicts are going to come. So I just assume if everybody's nice to each other, they'll be nice to each other. And I was super unprepared when two guys attacked me in the playground. And it was an interesting process, because I realized in that moment I learned a lot. I was not victorious, but I certainly, like, a lot of information got driven into me during that weird 6th grade fight. But so from a perspective of a parent, you could actually see the war in this context as being something like preparing my children for life. And that in that context, there's lots of things. Like, you can be a very skilled person. Like, say one of your children becomes really good at tennis, and that's just one part of their toolkit. They would then need to become very good at managing their emotions and at sort of strategy and training and all that kind of stuff. And that's pretty much where I think Sun Tzu is going here, which is that the thing that we think of as the key to victory isn't the thing, which would be strength or skill or luck. And what he's really saying is, no, it's none of those things. It's in your planning and preparation where you succeed.
So it's really everything. I mean, in essence, it's being super overly prepared. I mean,
Yeah.
like if you were just like boiling it down to anything. So I mean, like being strong or something like that might be part of it, right? You just have to figure out, what the main goals or whatever are, right? I mean, so okay. I mean, that's kind of what I got out of it. I mean, you definitely made a good point. Like if you look at a situation, like what they were talking about was a life or death situation. And I guess if you wanted to take this principle that they're talking about and just and really put it onto anything that you're doing, like in life, then you would just, if you thought about it as a life or death situation, then you would probably put more emphasis on your planning and everything, and really probably have a pretty successful outcome with it.
Yeah.
Now, is that always the healthiest thing to do? Maybe not. But that would just have to be kind of part of your success criteria at the beginning, is and really focus on just heading towards that. So
Well,
I like what
and knowing what is worth doing is, and I think that brings up an interesting point, because again, if you win a game of golf with your dad, it's fun, yay, that was awesome, but would it have been worth spending your whole week and ignoring your family to prepare for the match with your father? Probably not. But
exactly.
on the other hand, if it's something like, I'm currently working with some folks that are also brand new to the job, and as I mentioned last week, I'm in a very weird position, which is I've been gone for 2 years, but I literally went back to the job I left. So that means that I might as well have been there for 2 years, and this is 2 years plus 1 day. Whereas all these other people are equally expert at what they do, but they're brand new to this environment that took me a long time to understand. But now I'm kind of a master of that environment. But I see all the kind of indecision and sort of, a desire to do well, but how frequently in life that nobody signals you what it means to do well. They just assume you already know what to do well. So you're thinking like, well, if I'm asking the question of how to do this, does it make me look silly, or am I going to be perceived as somebody who's not skilled? And it's the ego starts to get into it. And I really do try to encourage these folks to realize that, no, let's just, figure out what you're trying to do. Like, are you trying not to get fired? That's a good thing not to do. But it does bring into sort of clear focus this idea that if you don't know what you're trying to do, and in this case, like the war in this case is your new career, then it really does, it behooves you to think of preparation and planning as a very cold-blooded and non-ego driven thing, and absolutely something that it's so important that you can't be emotional about it.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. Plan and prepare. Anything else on that topic?
Nope, that'll do it for me.
All right. So this next one, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Okay. So this one, basically, I mean, what I got out of this one too is, again, definitely being prepared. I mean, so a lot of, I think in this book, so I was reading a version online of it, and I think the first half of the book, like it's kind of cut up in sections, and it's part of the war, like, and so I think some of this might all be in like the preparation section of the book. And so basically with this is you really, really want to get fully prepared from yourself. And so this is kind of what we were talking about on the last one. Like you probably want to be strong, you want to be skilled and everything, but you also want to know the enemy as well. Like, so you need to know everything about them, their moves, their past, their history. And you also need to know, I guess, different strategies, if they attack different ways. And then how would we start relating that to like normal life?
I think you did a very good job of describing it, which is all you have to do is just take all those words that are in the framework of the enemy representing a force in battle and replace it with the enemy being like the unknown, or because I don't like to contextualize business from a competitive or zero-sum game perspective, because I really do believe that in a good business everyone can succeed and thrive. But in the world, it's just these and it's one of the challenges of trying to expand this text out to just everyday life, is that you really do need to recontextualize something like the enemy to being something more like the challenge. Like what is, like what's the as is or current state that you're in that you're trying to change, and what's the to be state that you want to go to, and then seeing all of the kind of resistance in between the as is and the to be state as the enemy. And so that's sort of like weight loss. Somebody wants to be like, hey, I weigh too much and I need to lose 40 pounds. Then you can just sort of say, I weigh 300 pounds and I want to be 260 pounds. What lies between me and that? And here you really do get into this idea of the opposition is whatever is opposing. And so when I was reading this passage, the thing that just kept coming back to me was this idea of who is you? Like, who are you at any given moment in life or in relationship to change? And that when he starts to lay out these ideas about, like, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, that you don't need to fear 100 battles. And I think what he's really trying to get at there is you can only do your best. That you aren't, fearing the battle is fearing the unknown, kind of, I think, in what he's getting at there. And that and that's, I think, amplified by, like, if you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you'll also suffer a defeat. And it's that hollowness that comes from, let's say you succeed at something, but you don't know why. You just go like, I want to get this new job. And then they just give you the new job. And everything about the new job isn't what you thought it was going to be. And it's just like, oh, well, I just did that thing. And now things are kind of different, but you don't know why. And so that's something like if you went into a battle with somebody and then you just killed everybody and then you're just standing in the middle of the field like, well, okay, well, we just won.
Right. So if you're like working on a skill really hard and then you get to where you want to be from that skill, and then you realize that whatever skills you learned aren't exactly what you really actually want in life or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I would see that like being if you know yourself but not the enemy. I mean, basically, because you really need to be so prepared in knowing your outcome of what you're doing, like, just so that you don't waste a whole bunch of time like figuring something out and then getting to a destination or whatever, and then not knowing, and then getting there and then realizing that maybe that's something you don't like or don't want to do or don't like anymore, and then you just wasted all this time getting there.
Well, and it sort of brings to mind the idea of the indirect approach. For a while, I was running this success seminar thing that I would meet with people every week, and we would talk about like how to apply just fairly simple techniques, methodologies, not just random techniques, but things where you would apply a methodology to your challenge. And what it tended to surface all the time was this idea of indirect approaches, and all that would mean would be something like, I want to meet more people, and I am going to go to a salsa dancing class to meet more people. And what you can run into there is that if you sign up for a salsa class and successfully learn salsa, which is what the class is for, you can go through the whole process and never achieve what you said was your goal, which was to meet people. So that even if you wanted to use something like signing up for a salsa class to meet people, you have to have some kind of criteria. Like, I will get email addresses for one person every week or something to move the indirect, which is, well, if I sign up for a dance class, I'm bound to meet people and I'm bound to like have a better social life by taking this salsa class. It's indirect, and it's unlikely to succeed unless you, and that's knowing yourself, because you know what you want to do is meet people. So you go and do this indirect activity of taking a dance class, but since it all resides inside of you, no one else knows you're there to meet people. So you can actually sort of like go through the quote conflict of the dance class and never walk out knowing anybody knew. And that's sort of, so I think that's the idea of knowing yourself, but not knowing the enemy. And then finally in that is if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. It's this idea of like cycles of this living life of just, you're always doing something, and, you think you're going in a direction, but you aren't, because you don't know yourself. So you have a vague idea in your head, like, I want to be more popular, or I want to be more successful. But there's no sense in your head of specifically what either one of those things means. And so you don't really know what the opposition to that is, because you don't know yourself. So you're always going to be in this constant state of either the superior enemy, because you're so unprepared that you don't have a sense of what you're trying to do. And it's one of the reasons that I think you find a lot of people get very comfortable being defeated, or more particularly, always complaining, always being in a state of, my boss is bad, the world is bad, the economy's bad, the politics is bad, everything's bad. And it's because that's the place where most people live. Most people live in the world of woe is me. If only things were different, my life would be better.
Man, that does not sound like a good place to live.
No, sorry, Bob.
All right. So basically, just know yourself, know what you want, and like really figure out what you want out of life, and then make sure you know where you're going. And that's kind of what we got out of this.
Absolutely. But and I did just one quickie point, which was just that in the place where, if you know yourself but not the enemy, the challenge is that the enemy remains, because you haven't fully engaged the enemy. So even if you have a success, that same enemy can be there. And psychologically, that could be something like a lack of self-esteem or something. So that you're like, oh, you know what? If I get 20 more pounds of muscle on my body, I'll feel good about myself. But you don't really know why you feel bad about yourself to begin with. So you put the 20 pounds of muscle on, and then you look in the mirror and go, I look great, but I still feel bad. So that's really the point of trying to make sure that you know the enemy, because you can have things that feel like victories that don't, because the enemy remains, because you never really address the enemy.
And then you just wasted a bunch of time.
Yeah, waste. If you
what
learn,
is waste? What is waste of time?
If you learn from it, it's not a waste. But if you don't learn from it, it's a waste. Yeah. Okay, so those are our first two topics. But let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back with our last two big topics from The Art of War.
Sounds good.
Okay. Hey, folks. Before we get back to our topic, if you're enjoying the show, please share it with others in any way you can. And you can always drop us a note at PhilosophyFoolsPodcast@gmail.com to let us know how we're doing, and let us know if there are any topics you'd like to cover in the future. Okay, let's get back to the show. And we're back. So, Josh, what's our next idea from The Art of War?
Okay, the next one. Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. So I think this one is kind of straightforward, but I just wanted to see kind of what you got out of it. And so basically, weak when you're like, if I'm thinking about war, and from somebody who knows nothing about war, I mean, if you are sitting there and say you look like I don't know how you would represent your fleet or whatever in war as being weak, but I would say if you were showing signs of weakness that but are actually strong, then if the other opposing side attacks you, then they're attacking assuming that you're weak. And so even though you know that you're strong, but you're showing weakness means that you are going to be extra strong when they come. They knowing that you are weak or thinking that you are weak means that they're gonna not bring as much force or whatever like to that battle, and they're just gonna come in like kind of almost assuming that they're gonna win because the other team seems weak or the other side of the war seems weak. So those are like the kind of like the obvious things that at least that I saw from this. And now how does that kind of relate to real life?
Well, in the real world, this is kind of the idea of psychological warfare. It's the idea of trying to win the battle before it begins by exactly what you're saying, but at a more like truly nightmarishly psychological level. And that is because in the simplest format, what you've laid out is exactly right. Get your enemy overconfident. Make them think that they are the Kansas City Chiefs going to play the New York Jets. And everybody's like, we can never lose this game. And of course, every now and then you'll see that the underdog will beat the overdog. And that's almost always attributed to people they just aren't taking the battle seriously.
Right.
And in those cases, you could probably say that's an example of somebody just Bill Belichick of the Patriots is just a good example of somebody who's literally just doesn't care ever about like a great victory. He's like, well, whatever. It's like we did a million things wrong in this victory. Yeah, we won by 130 points, but it's a terrible game. And he's doing that because he doesn't want any thoughts entering into the brains of his players that there's any value to the victory they just had. The second that game was over, its value was over. It didn't have this idea of momentum is stupid.
It does seem like a good quality to have like in athletes and athletics. It's like to kind of keep that mindset. I mean, because like as soon as you really think that you're the best, then that for a lot of people that becomes their downfall or whatever. And really, so it's almost like staying humble about yourself, in the game. And I guess you can just relate that to regular life too.
Yeah. There's a passage in The Art of War that I will mangle because I'm just pulling it from memory, but it's where Sun Tzu is describing how your victory in the mountain war that you just completed is irrelevant to the plains war that you're about to fight. He's just trying to make it clear that winning in a mountain battle is just a different thing than winning out in the open plain, and that you can't kid yourself into thinking that, wow, look at how awesome we are. We just kicked their ass, because he wants the general to be in a constant headspace of yesterday was yesterday, tomorrow's tomorrow, and now is the only time I get to prepare for what's to come. And so there is this overall sense of, in the particular thing you pulled out here, is just this idea of being mindful of the competition that you're in. And that can be something, and I'm not a big fan of deception. That's not, I think in the real world, that's not nice. But if you did want to boil it down to something very Machiavellian, where like all that matters is the victory, then sure, just do whatever you can to continuously play with the head of your opponent. And that can be, we're in a political age right now that is nothing but playing with the heads of people. It ceased to be about things like building roads and has become absolutely 100%. I don't like the way things are, or I don't like how events played out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend they didn't happen. And if I do it hard enough, other people will start to believe me. If I just stay consistent, if I just keep saying the same thing over and over and over again, that people will believe me because of how much I clearly believe myself. And it's an old tactic, and it goes way back. But we are living in a period right now where it's sort of it's the old phrase, like, don't believe your lying eyes, believe what I tell you. And that's what Sun Tzu's getting at there, is that you can do a lot to win if you can degrade the mentality of your opponent.
Yeah, and so that's almost something that it really goes to a moral thing. Like, is this even good to do? Or is it just a good thing to kind of think about? Like when you're going through life.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because and a lot of times you got to ask yourself the question, like, am I over dramatizing what I'm going through? And this would be a good place to determine whether or not that's a true statement. Like, I am willing to go fully to the mat in order for me to get like the Employee of the Month award, and I'll do whatever it takes. And it's like, yeah, maybe that's not. Maybe you should chill out and just do a better job. But
Yeah.
But if you're about to be murdered by somebody, or the like your family or your way of life is under physical threat, then maybe you should do whatever it takes, because and how you and I have never faced that. You and I have never faced a reality in which it was us or them. So this
Yeah.
is a thought experiment for us. But if we lived like in Syria right now, or like Afghanistan, you might be thinking a lot about this kind of thinking.
Yeah, I guess anytime you're actually physically fighting people or at battle or anything like that. I mean, really, that's something that really never even comes to my mind. And it might just be smart to kind of sit there and meditate on that for, like 10 minutes, that there are people who still go through things like this and on a regular basis. And I mean, it's hard for us to really think about that, because in our lives, or at least in my life, I live in suburbia with my kids, and and that's what I see, and so I guess that would be a kind of a good thought experiment to really meditate on and think about, and it would probably at least shed some light on life, and probably make us feel a little bit better, but also put ourselves in just a different world that we're used to. And anytime we can do that, I think can really just help our minds for anything that we're going to go through in the future.
Yeah, well, and a really good thought experiment that occurred to me during the pandemic was when people were like hoarding the toilet paper. But it brought to mind like this idea of what would happen if the supply chains literally collapsed. How many days would it take for all of the grocery stores to be empty?
Like 2 days.
Yeah, and how many days would it take for the drugstores to be empty? And you couldn't get your hands on gasoline. You couldn't get your hands on, again, food. That's the thing that kept going through my head, was like, we live in a very thin fabric of reality where we just know that we can always go get a can of Chef Boyardee to shove in our gaps. But when it came down to it, then what would happen? Like, if after a week or after 2 weeks, all of a sudden no one had food, what would happen to society? Like, our belief in like what the police can do, and our belief in what armies can do. When does it all collapse, and how much of a push would it take for what we consider to be civilization to just evaporate?
Were you questioning, moving out of the city and into a farm or something like that?
No, it was just the idea of like that realization that it wouldn't matter. Like, because I don't have, like, I would have to immediately learn how to kill and clean food and stuff like that. And that moving wouldn't solve that. And then you have to ask yourself the question of like, even though it would be very easy in Syria, perfect example. It was a perfectly fine place. It was nothing crazy about it. It just, all of a sudden, it was a civil war, and everything was different. And the only distinction between some of these countries and ours is size. So it would be more like, hey, this collapse took place in Alabama, or this collapse took place in Michigan, but that it still would have that potential to cascade out. And so I say this all just from the perspective of like, you know what? The mind, the thought experiment is always worth taking, because you always have to step back and go like, well, why am I so angry that I can't get a new car? Or why does it upset me that I can't buy new furniture? And then just sort of stepping back and go like, oh, I could be in the middle of a hellscape of death and destruction. It's just important to put a context around everything.
Yeah, simple practices like that absolutely help. Like there's this meditation practice, it's like called meta kindness, basically. And so you really think about like giving happy thoughts towards other people, and you can do it vice versa too. You can like really think about like receiving sad thoughts or giving out bad thoughts to other people. And when you think about it over and over, you can feel the changes in your body, like it really changes you. So yeah, I mean, thought experiments and little practices like that to your body, I mean, really do help.
Yeah, 100%. But okay, so what's our final thought?
Final thought is, even the finest sword plunged into salt water will eventually rust. And so my big thing, I mean, I feel like it's kind of obvious what it means. And so, but my big thing here is we all work for something. Like, so maybe you spend a part of your 20s or your part of your 30s, like, and you're really trying to sharpen your sword to a certain point. And what I mean by that is like learning a skill or perfecting something. And then you can literally just stop that. And what this is saying, just plunge it into salt water. So, or you can stop what you're doing, and then you won't be an expert in that anymore. Like if you stop something for 10 years, like if you stop playing golf for 10 years and you were a really good golfer, and then you stop playing for 10 years and you stink, well, that's because you weren't playing. And it's just like a kind of a thought experiment. Is just like, if I completely stop doing something, then I'm going to be bad at it. And so what I got out of this is actually for me was something like golf. Like I stopped playing all the time for 10 years. And then I realized something that, like, I know golf is like an interesting example, but like it gave me a lot of joy in my life, like because it's something I can practice all the time, something it's really hard to get good at, and it's just kind of like a meditation for me every day. And when I started playing again, about a year or 2 years ago, everything started coming back very slowly, and I'm still not even to the point where I was 10 years ago. So just thinking about that with golf and comparing it to the rest of life and what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm 35 years old. I mean, I have plenty of life to live. And so anything that I'm learning now, like, I think this is a good concept moving forward.
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. And to give an even more horrifying, clear thing is that I stopped drawing when I went back to work. I was having a hard time finding a way to put it back into my work day. And it's only been like about a month and a half. And I went back and I was like, wait a second, I haven't been drawing. I better get back on it. So that was a passive thing. It just happened. I just stopped drawing. And I spent the good part of the day yesterday drawing, and I was like, wait a second, I've lost everything. But that's not true. I didn't lose everything, but it was super clear to me that decision making and just moment to moment things of like, I'll use this thickness of line versus that thickness of line becomes like a real thought process instead of it being a natural thing. And it took a lot of the joy out of the activity. But broadly speaking, you're absolutely, I think, spot on, which is neglect. And that's what is shown by plunging something into salt water. Neglect is always going to be a bad thing for everything. So if you value a thing and you neglect it, it's like night following day. It is going to be bad.
Yeah, I think it's just like I think it's just a really good concept here for planning out life. Like right about now in my life is a point where a lot of the stuff that I kind of thought that I wanted to do has been changing into what do I really want to do. And so really like even planning out my day is almost revolved around this concept, because I want to be able to build skills for the next 30, 40 years of my life. Like, I don't want to waste my time on stuff that I'm not going to be worrying about, and so I have to really figure out like what's worth my 30 minutes of time, what's worth my hour of time, to build skills to figure out what I'm going to do. And I think this is a good concept to at least take some time and kind of think about, and what are you working towards, and what do you want to throw in the bucket of water and let rust.
And in that decision, you should probably make a really affirmative statement of, I'm just going to throw this away because it's not valuable to me. And so
that can be super hard. I was just going to say, I mean, that can be really hard because a lot of times those things that you're spending time on might not be the best value. Like, so for instance, in my life, with training, like, and working out, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast a little bit, is that I've really taken out that hour or hour and a half of that workout time. And I've spread that through my day and kind of more into my life, and like with like little 10-minute chunks and 15-minute chunks. And because really, all right, let me just throw this out real quick, because really a workout is an hour workout and then 30 minutes on each end for shower and preparation time. So it's like a 2-hour time period, and that's a big chunk of time for physical training or whatever. But I felt like that's a sword though that you need to like keep sharpened, and so I had to figure out how to kind of stick it into my life, and really thinking about that and using it over and over, and really figuring out what part of fitness is really important to my life. Like, has been a big part in figuring out fitness. And for me as a trainer, it took a long time, and that's being in the industry and knowing a fair share about like different health things and whatnot, and really like fine tuning my life over a few years to kind of like get that into my life. So I think this concept is just good for any aspect of your life, and I think people should probably take some time and maybe do some kind of practice like that.
Absolutely. And I concur 100%. And I do hope that that you and I both continue this activity of doing this podcast every 2 weeks is an activity of sharpening our swords in a lot of ways, conversational skills and thinking, because I think we try and push ourselves to not just have opinions, but to be able to explain what we think.
Yep, I would love to continue and sharpen the sword, because I know it's pretty dull, so I want to keep on doing it.
Stay in the line, brother. Okay. So.
All right, cool. Well, hey, let's just take a break, and when we're back, I'll discuss some in my dad corner, and then Uncle Greg will give us his thought of the week.
Sweet. We'll see you in a bit. And we're back. Hey, Josh, so what's up in the dad corner this week?
All right. So, man, the kids are getting old. Well, not really. All right. They're only 2 weeks older than last time. But anyway, so, all right. Charlie he's 19 or 20 months or so, and Adeline's 4 years old. And just some really cool things that have started happening over the past couple of weeks. And so that's another cool thing, is that how fast they really grow, because I think this is a big change, and this is what I'm talking about. So our little one Charlie, he's super attached to Adeline right now, because Adeline is acting like a big sister. I mean, like, just really getting into this like kind of teaching role, and like this like big sister, like, come with me, come look, Charlie, like, and like doing like little shady things on the side too, like I'll give her like some like a chip or something like that, and I'll be like, don't give that to Charlie, and then I'll see her like kind of look and be like, here Charlie, just try this, like it's good, don't worry. And like, so really, like, it's fun to watch, because she's really becoming like this human who, like, I try and teach her things, and she has a million things to learn, and and I'm 35 and I still have a million things to learn, but she's already like assuming this role of like leadership, and like blind leadership basically is kind of like what I see it as. And it's just been really fun to watch. And Charlie is also which is my 19-month-old, is really into just like doing what she says, and then also like following her, and then also reacting to her in ways like, maybe I don't want to do that, like what she's saying. So it's almost like almost overnight where they're becoming just more and more little humans, like learning real grown-up things at 4 and 2 years old. So it's wild.
Amazing. Yeah, we're just like, it's just like like it's this moment when we stop being like literal monkeys and actually just start to take on all the characteristics of human.
Yeah, and it can really happen overnight, and so I'm just excited on what else I watch them do, and hopefully they can keep on teaching me as much as I teach them.
There's two things that popped in my mind when you brought that up. Is that one is, in my lifetime, Charlie has always been the oldest males I knew. And now Charlie is the youngest male I know. And that's just a weird little bit of continuity. But my dad and my brother were always the oldest men I knew. And now I don't know any Charlies except yours. And he is the youngest man I know. So that's one thing. And the other thing is just being the youngest out of 6 children, and particularly the fact the middle block of that is 4 women, is the amount of time I spent as a kid doing exactly what you said, which is like, there's a lot of benefit to just going along with the program, because my sisters would just take care of me. It was great. And then I would just have to take these moment-to-moment decisions like, well, I really don't want to do this, so I'm going to rebel against this, but I want to keep this one direction of bring all the love to me. And as long as I'm compliant, they're all still very much, they want to take care of me. Like, they would play school with me and they would feed me and they do all these things. But every now and then I'd be like, man, I got to get away from these people. So it was it's an interesting dynamic, the young brother to the older sister.
Yeah, it's awesome to watch.
Okay.
All right, Uncle Greg. So that's it. That's pretty much all I have. And so what about you? All right. What is the thought of the week?
The thought of the week comes from our old pal, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And it was something that has stuck with me my entire life. And I tend to just use the front end of this statement, particularly as an insult to other people, but it's not really what we're trying to do. But the thought is, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little mind, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divine. And it's this idea of consistency being a vice, and that if you are a person who always thinks the same thing forever, and not only that, but you value that in other people, it's like, you must never change your thoughts or else you're bad. And that's what he means by the foolish consistency. It's just choosing a thought and keeping it for the rest of your life. There's positive consistencies, like working out all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. But the foolish consistency is the idea that there is a terminal state to thinking. I don't have to think anymore. I know what's going on. And that's when you start to just run into people who you literally just want to punch in the face.
So just always have an open mind about, new things in life.
Just think. The distinction between thinking and being is a gulf unlike anything that can be described. And that's the reason that when you hear these things about mindfulness, there is nothing hard about being mindful, except you have to think, or in certain cases, remove yourself from thought and then come back to thought. And so, but if you're surrounded by people who've always thought the same thing, you might want to surround yourself with other people.
Just think. I like it.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. So, okay. So what, you got anything fun coming up this week?
Nothing fun. Nothing too fun this week. Just gonna hang out with the family today. Probably go on a hike a little later, as long as this rain goes away. What about you?
I gotta get some drawing done, and I'm finally kind of kicked into the groove about what work actually means to me now. So I'm really trying to make sure that my time management and my sort of the value, like I was saying earlier in this podcast, which is, you can tell somebody's personal values by what they spend their time on. So I need to make sure that the time that I'm spending is on things that I find valuable, because it's very easy to slip into really annoying, particularly with like a television or something, or even podcasts. I just find that there's this thing I'll do where I just start listening to a podcast, and it's just an excuse to not do anything, as opposed to an active activity of like, man, I'm going to learn great thoughts, and then I'm going to move out into the day with these great new thoughts. It's more just like, yeah, I just killed an hour. Time to go to bed.
Maybe there's something to that, killing that hour though sometimes.
Got to be a decision. And that we've discussed that before. Is that if I want to watch TV, that's not a problem. But what it can't be is like a thing that follows another thing that follows another thing, and then I go to bed. So that's my
All right. Well, hope you make some good decisions this week.
And the same to you, my friend. So we'll see you next time. And I hope that I'm going to cut this out.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care, pal. We'll see you next time. Hey, folks. Uncle Greg here. Just wanted to thank you for listening, and be sure to join us next time when we tackle more of life's big ideas. Be sure to share the show with your friends and contact us at PhilosophyFoolsPodcast@gmail.com with your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes and anything that's on your mind. As always, a special thanks to Ted Onulak and Exit 10 Band for our music. You can check them out at exit10band.com. That's EXIT10BAND.com.